Wade!
Good morning, Rob.
Good evening, Wade. Live from the new studio here for Magic.tv. How does it look to you? Does it look
You
magical
know,
enough?
yes, it is. You know, I should probably do something like that.
Well,
Get
I'll
all like
fly over.
magical and stuff instead of a brick wall.
I'll fly over and help you with that. Anyhow, tonight we have somebody who I've been bugging for the longest time to be on the show. But before we introduce him, I want to shout out to the amazing people at Anathema Press for sending us that box of goodies. Me and Wade are going to be doing our very first official book review for Magic.tv, The Dancing Sorcerer by P.T. Misselberger. And while digging through it, Wade and I have already seen some pretty creepy stuff, right, bro? Like certain
It's a
people, man.
good book. I really want to, sit and probably even read it twice and just really dig through it because I like going through books and finding the specific gems and then just kind of making a huge deal about those.
Yeah, you know what?
And I'm already finding them.
The Dancing Sorcerer. If I were to ask, if people were to ask me, well, if I wanted to start on magical theory and get into it and have a better foundation, I would hand them that book because it's so well written. It's not chewy at all. I call it carbohydrate reading. You could read
Yeah.
it and it's easily digested, unlike certain people we've complained about in the past. That you'd
Well,
say
it's,
one,
it's not it's not a bunch of fluff. They
yeah,
cut right through it, and I like that they shop different magical theories of the universe in it. That you can
exactly.
go through like, I like this, that's crap. I like this, I like this.
Exactly. It's got something for everybody. And you guys should expect our review on this for the next couple of weeks, but we're taking our time with it. We're in no rush because Magic.tv, it's all about quality. And today's guest is the epitome of quality. He is a lecturer. He does the circuit to the East Coast, throughout the West Coast. He also has his own amazing YouTube channel. He is one of the people that I've actually gone to for consultations. And what I like about him, just like the author of This Dancing Sorcerer, is he speaks in English. And I'm not talking about English when he talks about the occult. He speaks sense. He's speaking human, not Dothraki or Vulcan. So without any further ado, I want to invite and welcome our guest of honor tonight to Magic.tv, Mr. Clifford Hartleigh. Good morning, good evening, Clifford. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing, folks?
I'm doing great, doing great. Welcome to Magic.tv, sir.
I'm honored. Hi, folks. I'm Clifford Hartleigh Lowe. Should I introduce myself, or do you want to go further?
Take it away. Tell us about you.
All right. I find it very hard to introduce myself because I've been doing magic of many kinds for so long. I'm in my 50s, but I've been practicing magic for 40 years because I started when I was an early teen. And I've studied and practiced about 20 different systems of magic in my lifetime. I own one of the largest occult libraries on the East Coast, at least 7,000 occult books. I've invented my own systems of magic, and I do a lot of lectures around the country. I used to lecture regularly at Pantheacon when that existed. I'm still one of the reliable presenters at Convocation, and I used to lecture at Crucible, which is a defunct New Jersey convention. What else should I tell you about me? Let's see. I describe myself as an occult theorist first and foremost, but I'm also an occult technician. I'm a pretty good amateur scholar and historian, and actual historians of magic sometimes consult with me. Let's see, what else? I was an early internet presence on occult matters. I own the oldest occult website, but it's so outdated I'm not even going to mention it. But I was one of the first people on alt.magic back in the old days, if anybody remembers that at all. Let's see. One of my claims to fame is back when I considered myself a Wiccan, I coined the term dark paganism to describe Wiccans who didn't believe in the threefold law and did curses. And I ran a group called the Church of the Black Sun in the 90s, which was not a great success, but was very influential to a lot of other people's ideas. And let's see, I revived the practice of weather magic, and I lecture mostly on hoodoo and on a vein of astrological magic, which in ancient times was known as the science of images, but some people call it scholastic image magic or Arab astral magic or a number of other names. A lot of people, when they say the phrase astrological magic, it actually means this tradition, and it's a good descriptor, but technically almost any type of magic has an astrological element, so you have to disambiguate a little bit. I'm right now preparing to run the world's first in-person astrological magic conference in New York, which will take place on Labor Day weekend in early September, and it'll be at the Lexington Hotel. And you can find out about it on astrologicalmagic.com/conference. Let's see.
Well, we definitely chewed some of the same ground over the years, especially in the 90s.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, alt magic, man, old school.
Yeah. As I was saying to you before we started off, I basically started off with a lack of resources. So this was the 80s, back when there was no internet that was available, and I was young and poor. I had no money, and I could barely afford even used books. There was nothing at the local library. So when I couldn't figure things out from the few occult books that I got my hands on, I improvised, and I came up with some very reliable techniques that were useful to me. And as time went on, when I was able to assemble a larger library, I began to realize that, firstly, the vast majority of modern magical books out there were garbage. They say that 99% of everything is BS, and that's even more so in the world of magic. But around 2000, people started publishing academic level delvings into ancient magic, new translations of books which had stayed in Latin and Greek and Arabic for hundreds of years that nobody knew about. And that was a revelation to me, because a short time earlier, I had started to abandon modern magical books and started reading and researching anthropology and archaeology books for tips on how to make the magic work. And the new wave of magical publishing over the past 20 years has been revelatory, and that's been a supplement to the innovative and improvisational magic idea of the 90s. What can I say? I am a stickler for magic which is palpable and provable. I'm also on the quest, like many people are, for the secrets of what I call radical manifestation, by which I mean magic which basically breaks the laws of physics over its knee. We want to summon spirits in front of witnesses. We want to shoot lightning bolts, like from Dungeons and Dragons, out of our fingertips. We want to turn lead into gold. And the puzzle is why this stopped working at some point in history and how we can start it up again. And part of my quest has been to study every system of magic and see if we can rebuild those techniques and restore them to the level of efficacy and potency that hasn't been seen in our lifetimes or even our grandparents' lifetimes, except maybe in the shadowy corners of the world where we don't usually get access.
You know, while you're saying that, can I ask you something? Since you're seeming to you want to go back to core, you want to go back to the old school, powerful stuff. I'd like to ask you, I'm sure the viewers are going to ask, from your research, so far, what has been kind of like the Ark of the Covenant practice that you're like, whoa, guys, there's something here. This shit fucking works.
Well, because I've tried many different ones, and I don't want to be mean, but I don't want to be political either. There are systems of magic which are really good at some things and bad at others. There's some which are good at nearly all things, and there's a lot of systems of magic which are just crap. So I definitely can evaluate things, and my mainstay of practice has become over the past 20 years astrological magic blended with hoodoo, or each independently, because both are fairly reliable and fairly potent. But there are other systems of magic out there which are reliable and potent, but are maybe not safe. So, for example, my first experiments, because I grew up an Orthodox Jew a long, long time ago, were involved with the Kabbalah, and that's a really powerful system, but it's buried in so many layers of secrecy that you really don't know what you're going to get until you pull the trigger. And that's not safe, because you can get people in terrible trouble. I did a healing spell on a friend of mine who was dying of cancer by using some Jewish folk magic, which had some Kabbalistic influences. And there was a terrible backlash. And it took me years to even partially recover from the sickness that it caused me, even though the person who was dying of cancer recovered fully. I know you practice other systems of magic which are related to it, but I did a lot of demon summoning back in the 90s. That was something I very much loved. I considered myself a grimoirist, and I still technically am. But while it was often reliable and extremely powerful, I found that the risk level was too high, and I basically turned away from that about 20 years ago, and I'm happier with my current practices. But nobody can ignore that Goetia is a powerful practice, or things related to that, like Kenneth Grant's Dark Kabbalah. That's powerful too, just not stuff that I do anymore. What else is interesting? Anybody who's attended a voodoo fete knows that it's powerful, but at the same time, it hasn't done the Haitians a heck of a lot of good, in my opinion. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but often they have drawbacks, and trying to find a practice which basically improves my lifestyle and my prospects in the long term has been a life project.
Well, let me cut you off on that one. You told me that when you started this, you didn't have money, right? You were running out of resources. You had nothing. But based on your blog and what I've watched, you've actually had a lot of success with wealth magic. I heard your story about like some uncle left you a shit ton of money, and you've had a lot of success in creative amulets and stuff like that. So I'm sure people are definitely going to ask, hey, how do we get a piece of that? What kind of magic would you recommend? Like, would you tell me, Rob, you want a 13th talisman of the Picatrix, make it the right way? We've talked about that. So like, what would you recommend to people who would like to add a couple of zeros to their bank account? What practice or what study?
Right. Okay, so this is a story I've told in other lectures, so I apologize for not bringing it up again intuitively. But when I was practicing astrological magic a number of years ago, must have been maybe 15 years at least at this point, I have an old friend named Kat, and she basically seemed to be obsessed with money magic because she's a starving artist. And I said, hey, why are you going to other people rather than me? I'm good at money magic just like anybody else. And she just rolled her eyes at me. And so in order to prove that I was good at this thing, which at that point I really was not obsessed with, I was doing okay financially then, but I wasn't doing fabulously, but I had a regular income 15 years ago, whenever this was. But I basically did a 3-year deep dive in all the traditions of money magic in order to impress Kat. And I came out of it with a number of techniques. And most importantly, I made a magical talisman from Picatrix, very similar to this one, second face of Aries talisman. And after about 2 years after wearing this ring, a relative of mine who was expected to leave me nothing and was generally believed to be living in terrible poverty, died and left me a small fortune. And sometime later, people on the internet said, oh, Cliff, it's a coincidence. Some people do money magic. It has nothing to do with your research on Picatrix, which is an important book of astrological magic. And I got really annoyed by their dismissive attitude. So I decided I would prove them wrong by making a second talisman and doing something similar. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine, Ursula, mentioned that there was an election coming up that I'd missed about a lawsuit talisman. So I made the lawsuit talisman, and I have to thank Ursula Rising for that amazing gift. And I basically kept that in my pocket for a period of time. And a lawsuit occurred over my father's care at a rest home, and I was able to get a settlement of substantially over $2 million. So I was able to do it twice, and I think that proves my point that that particular system of magic is potent. But my research was more profound than just on Picatrix, which is just one book. But I also studied hoodoo techniques for money generation as well, and that's proven much more useful to my clients because Picatrix is really advanced stuff. John Michael Greer, who translated it, described it as the rocket science of the Middle Ages. But people want money now, and if they want money now, I would usually recommend hoodoo techniques for that.
All right, so if you're talking about hoodoo techniques, and I'm sure you're already getting a lot of my students are here asking, like, ask him which hoodoo techniques to do. I'm sorry about that. They're excited. But the question is this, like, if you did want to use hoodoo to bring some basic money, where's a good place to start? Like, I've actually been making my own conjure oils because they're not really available here in the Philippines. So I've got to really handcraft them myself. But are there any particular go-to techniques that you recommend to people that you need more money? Hoodoo, easy, no fucking weird talismans. It's fake. You got to get the hair of the lion and shit like that. We've talked about that. This is more real man stuff doing. What do you recommend to people?
What I recommend to people, and seems to be reliable with my friends and clients, is a simple wealth lodestone altar. A lodestone is a hunk of magnetic iron. It's called magnetite by mineralogists, but magnetite is only sometimes magnetic. You need a lodestone proper, which is magnetite, which has a magnetic charge. A magnetic charge will allow iron filings and other things to stick to the lodestone, though it's not usually as powerful as a refrigerator magnet or something like that you would see in a lab. You take the lodestone and you basically consecrate it and basically wake up the spirit within it. Because to a certain extent, all magic has an animistic element, and lodestones especially are thought to be living minerals. You take your lodestone, hopefully a large one with a strong magnetic charge. You baptize it, if you're Christian, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, with whiskey. The whiskey will dry up pretty quickly, so the lodestone won't rust. And you place it on an altar, and you feed it a pinch of iron filings every week over time. And you place the lodestone on a tray, or as I do, in a saucer, and you put things around it which represent money to you. Sometimes it's literal. Often cross currency is used. So you basically take a dollar bill or the currency of your locality, and you make an X out of 2 of them, and then you stack that up higher. So there's a kind of progression. You can basically use, something like 7 single dollar bills and then cross them with 7 other single dollar bills. But it's more frequent to do higher levels of denomination because of a sense of progress. So in American currency, it would be a $1 bill, a $2 bill, a $5 bill, $10 bill, a $20 bill, and then a $100 bill, if you can afford that. In Philippine currency, I don't know what the denominations are, but it doesn't really matter the amount as much as there's a progression. Another thing you would do is you would take iron pyrite and drizzle some condition oil related to money on top of it, anything from Van oil all the way up to money drawing oil, fast luck, and so forth. And you place that in the proximity to the lodestone as a way of creating a visual and sympathetic resonance to gold. I've also found that it's even more effective to use literal gold in many cases. So one of the things I've done is I've taken family heirlooms, my mother's golden earrings and so forth, placed them in the proximity of the lodestone. And I tend to think that metallic curios tend to work a little bit better than animal and vegetal curios. All of them are used. So for vegetal curios, you might want to use chamomile flowers and buds, which are often found in a tea, alkanet root, cinnamon, many other options there, cinquefoil. And when it comes to animal parts, in hoodoo, you use gator paws, basically the chopped off feet of gators, which have been alligators, which have been preserved. Though I'm pretty sure if you're in a locality where crocodiles are more common, that also works. I also know that in South America, piranhas are associated with wealth because both alligators and piranhas are kind of voracious animals, and you want the spell work to act aggressively because capitalism is aggressive.
Indeed it is. Wow. It's like off the bat when you're already learning how to line our pockets. Actually, I do recall you teaching me that. And I actually, on my altar in my office, I have actually a crossed altar with a lodestone. So thank you very much for teaching us that. Now, the next thing I wanted to ask you is this, what was your original inspiration to get into the occult? What made you, of all people, say, I want to jump into this?
Well, I was very young at the time. I think I was 7 or 8 years old. And it occurred to me that I wanted to know the meaning of life, the big answers. And I felt that magic would be a great way to experiment on finding the things that science itself couldn't do. I was a science nerd from childhood on. I carried my mother's college biology textbook around like a Bible with me until it fell apart, and then got a copy of it and fell apart again. Another copy, I mean. And I try to apply an analysis, even if it's not, strictly scientific, processes of induction and deduction to magical theory. And, some of my conclusions will disagree with other people, but I've been largely systematic about my approach. In the 90s, I basically came to the conclusion that the intuitive aspect of magic, or towards the end of the 90s, was not really working so well for me. And I began to go back into the analytical in the 2000s. But there's a problem in the way many people approach magic, which going back to my fundamentals has been very helpful with. And that is what I call the problem of Kinko's magicians. And let me go back to my childhood again before I go to Kinko's magicians. I'm sort of jumping all over the timeline. But basically, I felt that if I could, when I was 8 years old, I thought maybe the best way to determine the big answers to these questions is to perform a magical feat, which is verifiable. And if it works, then magic is real, the supernatural is real, the afterlife is real, and maybe I can even figure out which religion is real. And what I ended up doing was summoning a demon, thinking that was a safe and logical option, which it definitely wasn't when I was, a kid, and getting myself into a lot of hot water. And what I basically did was I began to research all systems of magic to try to undo the damage which I had wrought. I nicknamed myself Teen Faust because I got myself into so much trouble. And Eventually, I did get myself out of that mess, though it took a long time. But by that point, I'd studied every system of magic that was written in print and some initiatory experiences as well. It was a tough problem, but it sort of forged me in fire. So that's how that started. But to go back to what I was trying to say about Kinko's magicians, one of the problems that I've had encountered in the 90s, which is still an issue today, was that I would encounter lots of highly initiated and theoretically powerful magicians working at the local copy shop, or selling coffee, or having terrible drug problems or love lives which were not commendable. They seemed to believe they had power, and they could actually demonstrate some supernatural abilities, but it didn't benefit them. Their lives were complete dumpster fires. And why did they not realize that they were not the masters of the universe that they thought they were? And it's taken me years to figure out what went wrong with them. And what went wrong with them is that they adopted a lot of ideas about magic from Eliphas Levi and the Victorian model. And their attitude was that in order for your magic to work, you had to have a positive mindset. You had to believe your magic was going to work. You had to believe you were powerful. Otherwise, it would fail. But if you maintain that attitude 24/7, as most of these people did, they would be resistant to the idea that they were doing something wrong and something wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And it was in the early 2000s that I began to realize that attitude, which may actually be productive for some aspects of magic, was leading people into a very dark and useless place because they were not making course corrections to their magic, which was clearly not working 100%. Mm-hmm. And so I broke free from that model and became more analytical and tried to be objective and made lists of things which worked and things which did not work. I started to track my progress and began to figure out through the processes of deduction which techniques were more reliable than others. And that became integrated in my practice of astrological magic, which is highly mathematical and highly quantifiable.
Wade, you want to ask something? Looks like you got something on your mind, brother.
Yeah, I've been kind of chewing over it back to something that you said in the beginning about you wanted to be able to do old school big nuts magic the way it used to be back in the Middle Ages. Have you read Julian Jaynes' Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind?
Not the book itself, but I've read summaries of it.
Okay, the basics of it being that the human brain itself operates differently from when it used to, and they use the Iliad and the Odyssey as comparisons of before and after this break, and the upshot of it with regard to magicians, because he wrote that for psychologists, but for magicians, it basically makes it a matter of perception that people are still doing things. These things are still happening around us. There's everything is going on. We just don't see it because we don't consciously acknowledge these things that are happening. Like, you'll have things in your house and you're like, oh, it's an old house. The house is settling, or that was one of the cats, or something shifted. I don't even attribute it. But yet these things are still going on. So I think there's a matter of, on one hand, a matter of people doing big nuts magic, and then there's the other problem of it's happening all around us and we just don't see it. And I was wondering if you had done any work toward the end of improving your perception to see it.
Definitely miraculous magic, or even dark miraculous magic, is partially a problem of consciousness. One of the things that I noticed when I was in the darker phases of my life, with my home being haunted by a demon that I'd summoned, was that my family members would experience many of these things and then go into rapid denial of them almost immediately afterward. And even more disturbingly, I would forget them if I didn't write them down, and then remember them years later and say, oh, why? How could I possibly have forgotten that demon which picked up my cat and tore it apart, or rather smashed it against the wall? And it's you can basically say that the human mind wants to suppress terrifying things, but my human mind wanted to revel in the occult and the more positive aspects of what was going on, and I still would forget it. One theory that is popular was inspired by the game Mage of the Ascension, which I thought was it's a cool game. And again, it's not reality, but they're ideas which can open up conversations. And it deals with the fact that there are wars of paradigms going on. And the magicians, the protagonists of the story, are fighting the technocracy, who are kind of the forces of order and sterility, who are themselves a type of magicians who have gone bad. Basically, our notions of magic are fighting against the dominant paradigm out there. And sometimes the dominant paradigm pushes back, alters our memories, and basically makes our magic not work as well. And again, I don't believe in the literality of it, but I do think that we're struggling against some force which didn't exist 500 years ago.
Very true. Kind of like an egregor, some sort of collective energy that is trying to cock block, for lack of a better word, what we're trying to do. Now, the funny thing about it is, here's the funny thing. If something pushes upon the magical consciousness, it's so funny how the magical consciousness pushes back. Like we were talking about it in one of our last episodes with Marco Visconti, which was the rise of the witch talkers. I'm like, well, what? Wow, that's your fucking reinforcements? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, is that how magic strikes back? I wanted 100 Cliffs and Wades. Now we got millions of witch talkers saying that they're going to summon the destruction of the moon. I'm like, OM fucking G. So it's like, all right, let's just get the popcorn and watch the show.
Yeah. The good news and bad news about that is that the popularity of the occult and magic is cyclical, and that witch talk phenomenon will blow up at some point, and then we'll have a fallow period where it becomes controversial to practice magic, and the serious people will stick to it, and the people who are into it for a fad or a fashion statement, they will basically drift off and get into vampires or ghosts or some other thing. So the same is true with astrology. Astrology right now is at its peak. Eventually it will dip, and the pretenders and the faddists will basically disappear. They'll go into the woodwork and find something else to exploit and destroy.
You want to know what was funny? Was I worked at Ancient Ways in the 90s when The Craft came out and hit theaters.
Yeah.
Oh my God. The people we got in the store, it was insane. Talking about like the witch talkers, people would come in and it was invariably a teenage boy and 2 or 3 giggling girls with him that were like kind of standing behind him. And he would come to the counter and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for the advanced magic, not the basic stuff like changing your eye color. You're like, okay. So my go-to became I'd go over and I'd pull down a copy of John Dee's True and Faithful with all the Elizabethan typeset and the woodcuts. I go, here you go. And he opened, because it's the big brown leather book like in the movie. And he opens it and he's looking at it with the long S's and all the sigils. And you're like, perhaps the young master would like something less advanced. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. We can do something. Yeah, we can dumb it down. You're like, yes. Yeah, now we can get this back. Like, you got to recalibrate them and make them realize that, like, yeah, okay, maybe you're talking a good game. Maybe you guys have, like, seen the movie and you've done a couple of candle spells. But there's a lot more going on in the world than what you actually think you saw in the movie.
Totally agree.
And it's like you see like the Goetic magic and the Enochian magic and all of these things, and these people suddenly realize, like, wait a minute, this is actually, you go from your little chemistry set that you got for Christmas, and you're like, oh no, I want a meth super lab like in Breaking Bad, and you're like, do you really?
It's funny you mentioned that, Wade, because if it wasn't that shit from The Craft, it was what we call Necronomicon Meltdown. You guys remember that one? That every mother and every asshole and their mothers would hear about the Necronomicon, right? And I want to go straight into that. I can handle the Necronomicon. Then they start messaging me, Rob, I got to give you this book. Why you got to give me that book? My house is haunted. I'm seeing shit. I can't sleep straight. I'm like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? So it's like,
which Necronomicon?
The Simon one, the one with the black and the Simon one. So basically, they didn't know what they were messing with, and then next thing you know, their lives turn upside down. So which brings me to the next segment. Thank you very much for your first introduction, which is now the current events. Okay, Cliff, I want to hear it from you. Okay, no holds bar. Where's the occult right now? Where you're standing? Where's the occult? Where's magic? Are we on uptick? Are we dipping? Are we going to have a bunch of mutants like the witch talkers? Or are we going to have a new line of Jedi occultists that are going to help save the world? How do you see the world right now with the occult?
I think it's broken up into a number of different segments. There's no one single direction. You have people who are very interested in hardcore scholarship who are reading the PGM and practicing it. You have people who are very serious about magic, and they're doing some really great groundwork. But you also have people who are, as you say, the witch talk people who are interested in magic, which flatters their egos, and they aren't terribly interested in results unless they basically want to scare themselves. They're using the occult the way teenagers used the Ouija board back in my day. They're using it as an entertainment. And this is an interesting bifurcation because there are many subsets of each of them. One of the things I'm encountering, which I really don't like, and it's one of the reasons why I created the conference, is that there are a lot of people who are getting into my form of astrological magic and have not paid attention to the fact that me and the creators of this tradition or revivers of this tradition have said this is really difficult to do. This will take sometimes 10 years to really master. And it can be a dangerous tradition if you handle it wrongly. And what you have are right now are about 100 people out there producing talismans for sale, which they learned in a year or two. And the talismans don't work, or they work badly. And I think this is going to create a crisis point where it risks discrediting the tradition that I helped popularize. Because the most important lesson that I've been trying to impart is that this is something which you really cannot, no matter how smart you are, really get the scope of within 10 years. It wasn't, and I'm a pretty smart guy. It took me 10 years to realize how little I knew about this tradition. And I don't want to discourage people. I just want them to realize that they should pace themselves and recognize that while they will get some inspiring experiences as they evolve and internalize this material, there's always much more left to learn. I think that the phase of the occult revival we're in right now is a really inspiring and important one. But we have not, even the best of us, rebuilt our way back to the glory days of magic. Nobody's making flying carpets or magic mirrors. Nobody is summoning dragons and so forth. Nobody is turning into a wolf or a rabbit or some other thing. When we start doing that and doing that reliably or semi-reliably, that's when we are at the full restoration era. And I hope to see the beginning of that in my lifetime, because that's, what we're all trying to achieve. I think it might be possible. But we will not make advancement if we don't act self-critically and realize how far we have to go and how little we know. And that's why I like the people who are practicing Goetia on a hard level, PGM on a hard level, astrological magic on a hard level. And I'm so worried about the other segment of the population who don't want to be told that they're wrong about things and there's so much more they have to learn, because they may discover that they have far to go by making terrible mistakes, which have life-changing consequences for the worse.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, because like even you mentioned the Goetia, right? For my birthday, I did a summoning of Belial thanks to Wade's support. And I actually think that it was more like, did I summon him, or did he kind of like said, hey, fucker, call me? Because all of the things lined up that like, wait a minute, everything's falling together too nicely. I don't think I'm calling him. I think he's kind of get my attention, and it kind of pulled me out of my depression. But if speaking of Wade with it, the amount of intricacy I had to put into it, preparing this detail per detail. I didn't want to F it up because I was going to summon a king of hell. Okay. That's one aspect of the Goetia. I was even asking Stephen Skinner, how do you recommend I do this? I was getting multiple approaches. I was fasting. I was abstaining, everything I could, because I wanted to do it the proper way. Then you've got other people who just publish PDFs and say, draw this circle and say the guy's name, and voila, Belial will appear. And I'm just like, well, wait a minute. Okay, that's like me saying I'm going to make an atom bomb in a formal laboratory with equipment, or giving a guy a piece of plutonium and saying, well, this can go boom. You see what I mean? And that's the problem that I'm worried about, that like with these shortcutted magics, something might happen down the line where it's going to go kaboom, and now magic might get outlawed or might get the scrutiny of the world. Like, what the hell? You get what I'm saying? Do you think that's a possibility in the future?
I think we've reached a turning point where magic was not likely to be outlawed, but I do think that we might get vendettas, and we might get vigilante justice. I think that's a real problem, especially in parts of the world where the law is not, law enforcement is not as strict as it is in the United States here.
Speaking of the United States, we just had a governor in Florida. He's banning books in school. Yeah. So that you can't teach about the existence of non-white people. And I think that as soon as magic starts kind of coming around again and having some recognition, we're going to start seeing book bans. It's going to happen in the United States.
You know, that is almost certain. However, at the same time, look how well book bans historically have worked against magic. The books got burned, and then they were copied furtively. The Picatrix, which is the book I primarily study, according to legend, and I'm not sure how real this is because I haven't found a documented source, if you were found with a copy of Picatrix, it was burned, and so were you. And yet copies of Picatrix survive. A lot of books of magic have been lost throughout history, not because they were eaten by worms, but because the very last copy was thrown onto the pyre. And yet the majority of meaningfully useful magical books have survived because if it was really effective, it was probably copied a lot. And no matter how hard people suppress magic, magic comes roaring back because magic is a lot more useful than the alternative. And so I'm afraid of some persecution, but I don't think that it will be as meaningful as other people do. One of the things we are learning in the history of magic and the scholarship is that even during the worst times of the witch trials and burnings and the persecution of magic, magic was flourishing in a powerful underground. And really nothing can stop magic ultimately. It can slow us down, and it can probably take the less experienced and the more foolhardy people and put them in prison or on the gibbet. But the rest of us will probably be fine.
Hey, we got a message.
Honestly, the only thing that can really stop magic is greater magic. So unless they wanted to hire their own warlocks to suppress the magical community, and then they're kind of having to dip into that themselves. So we could see, some of the both sides of that.
It's practically hypocritical, to be honest. It's very Star Wars Sith Lord, where they killed the Force users because they wanted to be the only Force users, right? Because that was their biggest fear. We have a message here from the very good-looking Dr. Jeremy Weiss. Yay! Good job, Clifford. Wade and Rob. I'm finally glad. I'm glad you are finally letting us in your talk. All right, that's from Dr. Jeremy Weiss, one of the most amazing guys we've had on the show so far. Doc Weiss, thank you very much. So, like I said, one thing. Okay, I'll just share with you on this. I'm hoping one of these days that magic will be given the respect that it's due on a global level, because wherever you go in the world, there is magic, whether you like it or not. However, this is one thing I'll just share with you, and I want to get your take on this. What I'm trying to wonder is, like, you got guys like there with billions and billions of dollars. They have more money than they know what to do with. Elon Musk, Bezos, Buffett, Gates, right? Mm-hmm. How hard would it be for these guys to donate, let's say, $10 million, okay, to research the effectivity and kind of like systematize these practices, not scientifically, but say, how does this work? And let's make a working system out of it. But the sad thing about it is these guys with the money are not doing that. They'd rather go to Mars. They're not looking internally. And one thing I've believed is that if you are given all the wealth in the world, the only way to go is the spirit, right? Because your bills are paid. Right? A lot of people say, I don't want to spend I don't want to do my rituals because I got to work a job. But if you've already have everything paid, you got no excuse. So I'm wondering, Cliff, how far are we off from like one guy like Elon Musk saying, you know what? Let's do it. Let's make the technology of the soul. Let's see how far this rabbit hole goes. Here's money. Here's research. We'll do papers. We'll see how this affected people. How far are we off from that, Cliff?
We're not far off at all. I have a number of wealthy clients who basically pay for me doing celestial petitions and making talismans for them, and they give me carte blanche. They say, "You name them, you give them the number, Cliff, and I will pay your bills. Just do great stuff." But this is not one of the uber wealth, not a guy with billions, but a guy with maybe 100 million. It's only a matter of time before we stumble across a couple of patrons who do things like that. A lot of magical research back in the 20th century was basically funded, or at least metaphysical research was funded by people who left their money in their wills to psychic foundations and the things like that to prove the existence of the afterlife. All we need to do is basically set a net wide enough that we will catch a wealthy person who will bequeath upon a magical foundation rather than a psychic foundation to do active magical research for the next century. And that will be a very key part of the restoration. On the other hand, you brought up something interesting about the idea of legitimacy of magic. And this is something that I don't have an answer for, but it's something that's worth talking about. There are advantages to a legitimization of magic, but also a price. If you legitimize magic, then basically you are subject to rules, because if magic is acknowledged as a reality, laws will be passed will restrict aspects of it. Being a rogue magician, on the other hand, basically makes you seem like a crazy person to most people in society, but it gives you a lot of freedom. Mm-hmm. And a lot of powerful magicians today prefer the latter choice. They want magic to be disreputable, except to a select few who can pay our bills, because that gives us maximum freedom to do whatever we want. Mm-hmm. And I'm torn between it because I like the rebellious aspect of magic. I dress in black for a reason, but I also want to crave the recognition that legitimacy will afford. And when I was younger, I definitely wanted the legitimacy, but I didn't realize what the price might be. And I go back and forth on that myself by calling myself a sorcerer. A sorcerer is a rogue magician. I want to have the sexy leather jacket and that kind of vibe going on, the being the big bad rebel, while also craving the recognition of the fact that, magic at its high level is more complex than brain surgery. It's more complex than rocket science. It is not something which is the product of the superstitious, the foolish, and the weak. And all of us who do magic, especially if we're serious about it, have that little bit of insecurity. We can't, go down the street in wizard robes and get respect. People think that, we are insane. We escape from the Renaissance fair and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I would like a day where we are respected for the work that we do. And what we have to suffice for now is the recognition of our peers and colleagues and the recognition of the spirit world, which basically think that we're the only people that matter.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, here's the one thing I want to ask you. For all the newcomers out there, what do you recommend that they do in their practice to further us and bring us closer to that golden age or that ideal world where our practices are actually taken seriously? Because there's a lot of people are getting into it, but there's some people who they use it as a quick a smash and grab. Like, I'll use it to tell you, okay, buy this, and then your boyfriend will come back, and the next nothing happens, and then I just got your money. I fooled you. The other option is actually figure out how to summon and do the thing and do the consecration and put the work into it, then sell it, and then it's work, but at the end of the day, it's honest work. So what kind of recommendation can you give to the new generation to help us get closer to that end result that we're looking for, that result where magic is actually taken very seriously by the societies?
What I would recommend to newcomers is, firstly, read everything. There's a lot of trash out there, and develop a degree of tolerance for going through 99 books which don't teach you anything useful for that one book you stumble across which teaches you something powerful and life-changing. The second thing is that while you should interact with people on social media and so forth about magic so you can learn and teach, what you're doing in terms of your magic, keep absolutely secretly. I find that when people know about the magic that you're doing, it works less efficiently. And secrecy, or rather a hermetic seal around your practice, seems to improve its power level. And lastly, what else would I recommend? Do what other people don't do. If you see people doing magic on the internet, these are people who are largely failures. If you follow the rules which have been set before, people who have done money magic and didn't get money, done love magic and didn't get love, tried to do enlightenment magic and knowledge magic and didn't get knowledge, those are the majority of people out there. They're clearly doing something wrong. Pay attention to what they're doing and then do the opposite and sacred.
That's really solid information. Thank you for that. So we're going to give you your first round of applause. You got something you want to say, Wade?
I'm good. That was very, to the point, and it was right on it.
All right, now comes to my favorite. You go ahead. Now comes to my favorite segment of the show, Occultex. Okay. And I'm very, very curious to see what this Clifford Hartleigh have prepared for us. This is where you, the teacher, can share with us anything from your bag of holding that you feel you'd want us to learn. So you gave us something about prosperity, and luckily last week we had something from Dr. Jeremy Weiss about love. So you could do either or if you are feeling like a total badass, you want to be that rebel, How to Shut Down the Guys You Hate by Clifford Hartleigh. I mean, whatever. The sky's the limit, man.
Well, I was going to give you three options. Money magic, we covered that already. A spell to make people give you a phone call, which works, or a mind control spell. So let's do a mind control spell, because I did a lecture on that last weekend at Convocation. I did mention this technique, which is pretty reliable.
All right.
Though there's one factor that is a bit of chaos, which is that originally when I developed it, I had an ingredient which is no longer available, but you can do a substitution. So this is what I call the domination cross. And this I invented about 20 years ago and change, actually more like 25 years ago. And it works pretty reliably. And it's sort of a version of the Jedi mind trick. So you take a domination oil, domination water, or the version thereof that you have, and you put it on your finger, and you do, I bless thee and I purify thee, I bless thee and I empower thee, and I grant thee I bless thee and I grant thee the powers of domination. And then, because it will have a mark on your forehead, you want to basically conceal it, and you go, be thou within me and be thou made perfect. And as long as that's basically on your forehead, you are able to do the domination cross. What you do is that you approach somebody that you want to persuade, and it usually only works on people who don't have a strong opinion about an issue. And you basically look at them straight in the eyes, but you're visualizing them agreeing with you, nodding and saying yes to whatever you ask of them. And you focus your will upon their third eye region, even though you're making eye contact. And you ask them to do a thing. And back in the day, what I would use this for was I would use this to get clerks at stores to honor expired coupons, and it was pretty reliable at that. But you can use it for just about anything. However, if a person is very resistant to the idea, or basically believes this action will be out of character for them, they'll push back against it. But this is a very simple technique to get people bent to your will. I taught this to a friend of mine, and he was so good at it that he basically went insane. So it's a little bit risky, so be careful about it. But mental influence is really about 90% of magic, and it should be a fundamental to what you do. And again, when you do this, don't be particularly cruel about it, and don't go beyond your own ethical range. That's up to you. You have your own conscience to deal with. But getting someone to honor expired coupons, getting out of parking tickets, things like that, that's perfectly innocent and perfectly reasonable. And
how about like free upgrades on an airline? Would you consider?
Yes. I would, when I do things like that, I tend to use stronger stuff. This is, you can buy domination water, domination oil at the corner Botanica or a magic shop. It's not too hard to find. In order to make big money and do things like that, I would use talismans for that. But that's an advanced topic, and that would take much more than the time we have here to discuss that.
So what kind of oils would you recommend? Because there are quite a few domination oils that exist. Like I have a lot of follow me oil here. I have come to me oil. I have Van oil. Like what else would you recommend for because sometimes people just can't find domination oil. Like here in the Philippines, there's bend over oil, but there's not much domination oil. What are our alternatives to work with? All right.
Well, I work in tandem with Lucky Mojo, so they have their own line of oils. But many of these recipes have variations from different vendors all over the place. When I developed the Domination Cross, it was Vondi's Domination Waters, which I don't think are available anymore. It was a red cologne, which had a cherry scent and a drop of ammonia in it, apparently. But that's no longer available. But Domination Oil was available from Lucky Mojo, but I don't like that nearly as much as Controlling Oil. Essence of Bendover is extremely popular, and it's a very old formula. So most of the time when you encounter Essence of Bendover, it's basically a minor variation on something which is well over 100 years old, and that you can depend upon being probably effectively the same thing wherever you encounter it across the world. There's Influence Oil and Influence products. Those are also interesting. I like those. I can use Controlling Oil most frequently. And let me think of anything else. Do As I Say is also really good. I had some great experiments with Do As I Say recently, but that tends to have a verbal component. So if you're trying to influence someone over the internet who can't hear you using text, Do As I Say may not work nearly as well. But Controlling is my favorite. Domination has, rather Domination Oil, which is different from the Domination Water from Vondi. Domination Oil has a cruel element to it, so that when people try to resist, they experience pain and fear. Ouch. And that wasn't the case with the Vondi Domination Waters.
Would you consider Domination Oil something difficult to concoct yourself? Or like, in other words, with proper research, can you make Domination Oil? Or do you really just say, Rob, don't even waste your time, get it from Catherine and Lucky Mojo?
If you're a beginner, you should probably buy it. The amount of time that it'll take to experiment to get a viable product will be more than a year at least. So if you're a beginner, just buy the product and spare yourself the pain. If you're thinking about being a root doctor or a practitioner on this level, in a serious level, after you learn the fundamentals, you can probably invent yours pretty quickly. Domination class products use usually a combination of licorice root and calamus root and a few other things. And the essential oils also have their own history and associations. So figuring that out would basically require me maybe a half an hour to create my own formula, but I'm pretty advanced. For a person who's young and not deeply invested in this, it's going to take them years for them to be able to stumble across a viable formula of their own.
So really, it'd be better to buy that one. Now, in a pinch, is there anything like, let's say you're in a place where none of these oils are available? Would you recommend well, then you can get some olive oil, you can get some cinnamon oil or anything like that? Is there anything that can be done as a shortcut or like a lighter version of it? Or it's like a no-go without the domination oil?
In a pinch, you basically get licorice root, which I'm pretty sure you can buy. It's basically a twig. You chop it up, put it in a bottle with a carrier oil like jojoba oil, I forget how you pronounce that, or almond oil is a better choice, and add an essential oil. And I'm trying to figure out which one would be most appropriate for this one. Maybe a musk oil or patchouli oil in combination. Those would work, I think, reasonably well, but I want to check my notes because I don't make a lot of oils personally. I've only made a few, and mostly because I lean into the Lucky Mojo catalog, because Cat Ironwood, who's made nearly all of them, is really much better at it than me.
Yeah, wonderful.
I had a friend who he was moving to Florida, and he left. He gave me this crate of all of his oils from Lucky Mojo, and so I've got like 200 bottles of all these different oils, and probably a third of them are, domination, do as I say, bend over. There's one just called I Dominate My Man. I'm not sure why he had that, but it's so I've got a ton of these to play around with. Maybe I'll give that a shot, because in my line of work, I actually end up having to dominate a number of people to make them go away.
Well, since we have a little bit more time, Cliff, I hope you don't mind. We're still we got a good 10 minutes before the show wraps up. You mentioned something about getting someone to call you. How difficult would that be?
The method that I used, which was not completely reliable, but reliable enough, is what I call the lychee spell. I knew someone who really liked lychees, and we would run club nights together. And when we were all dehydrated, one of our friends would bring lychees to basically dole out to us in the sweaty audience. And what I did is I took a photograph of this woman who almost never called me, and I would put a tray of lychees in front of it, or sweets, or whatever else she liked. And basically, I would do a honey bath, and I would light incense, and I would pray that she would call me, and often she would. So basically the lychee spell is you can take a variant of this based upon what the person likes. So if you want a person to call you who's in business with you, and that they like sushi, you make an offering of sushi before them, burn incense, and you do a honey bath in preparation for that, and so forth and so on. But if you are going to choose these things, the best option are things which either are of a sweet scent or flavor, or things which are shiny. If this is a person who's motivated by money, add iron pyrite to the offering tray, or golden coins or jewelry, things which are shiny. Shiny things attract people, and sweet scents make people like you more and are more inclined to be drawn towards you. And that's how it works. You can get a framed photograph, and you can jazz it up a little bit by taking, let's say, a condition oil and put it around the frame. The most important things are incense, the offering, the picture, and the honey bath.
Okay, you mentioned the honey bath. So for those who don't know what it is, what exactly is a honey bath?
Sure, it's pretty simple. It's a spiritual bath, which means that you have to start clean. You pour a bucket over your head, which is diluted honey, and you air dry, and you wipe up from your toes to your head because you're trying to draw something towards you. Honey baths are one of my most favorite things. I should do them more frequently, but the only reason why I don't do honey baths every day is because it requires me to air dry, and I don't always have the time for that.
Mhm.
But honey baths are really good for social events. They're very good for love spells. And you can get fancy. You can combine honey with other elements depending upon what your need is. So if you're going out on a hot date, one thing I might do is basically get a bucket of hot water and put in some cherry bark or lovage root or violet leaf, which are used for love, in order to make my date a little bit more sexy.
Wow. Well, damn, Cliff, that was more than I expected, but I am very, 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 very pleased with all we've learned. We didn't just get one thing, we got a lot of things from you, and we want to know more. For those people who want to know more about you, who want to read about you, attend your talks, where can they go?
Sure. If you're in the United States, I lecture every year at Convocation in Dearborn, Michigan. But if you want to find out about me, you love my videos. I have a YouTube channel called Grimoire TV, and I have several websites, clifflow.com. And my new website is astrologicalmagic.com. And if you go there, you'll see there's a conference I'm running in a few months in September. And hopefully some people will listen to this and buy tickets and go. So that'll be astrologicalmagic.com/conference. And
Did
thank
you
you
still
for
have that sorcery magic page, by the way? You had that old sorcerer or sorcery page? You
Oh
still
yeah,
have that one?
sorcerer.blog. I haven't updated it in a while, but there's a lot of content on there still.
Yeah, a lot. That's actually one place I first did my research on you, and I wasn't how do I say at all disappointed at what I learned. So with that being said and done, Cliff, thank you so much for enlightening us. Wade, anything you want to ask Cliff before we wrap up the show?
This is all really good, good material. A lot of good practical information there. I strongly recommend the Julian Jaynes book, "Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind." It really does kind of get you thinking more about like the doors of perception, about how to kind of increase your perception at the same time you're increasing your power. It's good stuff. The longer you work on it, the more you start seeing things going on around you all the time.
True.
It's good stuff.
All right, so we're gonna, Cliff. We're gonna actually put you now again in the waiting room. Please don't go anywhere. But we're gonna pretty much call it a show. Thank you so much for joining us, Cliff. This is amazing. I can't wait to get this on the YouTube channel. Now, next week we have none other than Bob Freeman, occult detective, occult investigator, going to be doing some old ghost busting. Very nice guy. He's going to be joining me and Wade, and then Wade and I are going to take a week or two off to just relax because at the end of the season we have somebody big planned for all of you out there. I'm still trying to get one or two other people before the season ends, but season 2 has been nothing less than monumental. So I'm going to hide Cliff for a bit. Wade, it's always a pleasure. And again, to our friends at Anathema Press, thank you so much for the books that you sent us. You'll have a very interesting review of P.T. Misselberger's The Dancing Sorcerer coming out very soon. So we're going to end the show. This is Robin Wade. Good night, and we're on Magic.tv.